Welcome to the Fight Podcast with Jake and Nicci Hamilton,
where we discuss the complexities of marriage and manhood through real, raw, personal stories.
Okay, welcome to the Fight Podcast with Jake and Nicci Hamilton. We are back after, what have we been up to, Nick?
Well, it's been a long month, 2 months. I don't know. It feels like a year. We did our annual cousin camp adventures. And so that has been taking up all of our time. So anything you've seen or heard from us,
Social media or otherwise, has been focused
from you,
around.
actually, my social media was very focused around cousin camp.
Yeah.
Yours was very focused around things we filmed a long time ago because it was like that was going to take us out for a month. So cousin camp is about 4 weeks-ish. Sometimes it goes 5.
Yeah, because some people who don't follow at all any of the social media,
especially
or
my
follow
social
you,
media,
or haven't heard us mention it, what is summer camp? What is cousin camp?
So we take, I want to say all, but there's a few kids who don't come, of my junior high and high school nieces and nephews. Mm-hmm. And we kind of bring them in from all over, some come from Arkansas, from different places in Southern California, different places around. And we bring them in the house for 4 weeks and we do camp. So this year we had 10 kids total.
Wow.
Sleeping all over the floor in every crevice we do not live in a very big house.
Yeah, let's make it clear. It's not like we bring in 10 kids and everybody gets a bed. There's no
so
version
it's really
of this.
camping. It's amazing.
Crazy.
And I try to make it like camp. So we do games and what I call the Cousin Olympics, and we do adventures. We did whitewater rafting and
rented a boat.
Go on boats and do all the things that you would do at, say, a traditional camp that lasted a month. And it's a lot of fun. The kids really enjoy it. I think I enjoy it more.
You enjoy it more than the kids?
Sometimes no, the kids love it. They really do. You don't really,
kids do love it.
You don't really know what, especially teenagers, they hold their cards tight. So they're not going to tell you if they're really having a good time. Yeah. But I can tell if you ask, like, oh, what's the highlight of your year? It's always cousin camp, because it's a lot of fun. And it's expensive and it's taxing and it's emotionally a lot. However, I think it's the most rewarding thing that I do in my year. It kind of got birthed during COVID because the kids had some time off, and it was like all of our kids were out of school all over California and the country. And it was like, why don't we get them together, and hang out for, I think it was the first time it was just like, a week, fly up your kids and we'll hang out for a week. And that week ended up lasting, the first one I think lasted 6 weeks, because it was like, well, let's do one more week. And Jake and I had a vacation with our kids planned at the beach during that time. It's like, well, let's just take everyone with us. And it just kind of went and went. And but
it was the never ending camp.
It was the never ending camp, actually.
True.
And by the end of it was like, we need to do this every year. And so Jake and I, you and I, we left our family, our core family, in 2000.
Oh yeah. When we moved.
When we
moved up here. Yeah. In 2016.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I come from, we both had all of our family, right?
Yeah, all of our family for the entire beginning of our marriage, our life. We actually all lived within about 15 minutes of each other. I mean, give or take. We lived about 15 minutes of each other, and it was about how many, there was, 40 of us, 30 of us at the time. I don't know. Lots
probably
of people.
More. I think we were up to 22 grandkids.
Yeah, you're talking nieces and nephews, cousins, aunts, uncles, like the whole deal, mom, dad, the whole thing. We all lived super close to each other for the first 36 years of our life. 36, 38.
Yeah, and so then we moved, and we did bring some of family with us, but we kind of separated a lot of our kids when we did that.
Yeah.
And it's funny when you're doing things that feel exciting and they feel like, like the wind of God is on it. Which is what that felt like that move did for us. Like, we packed up, and within 4 weeks, we basically left our entire hometown, everything we knew, and moved 10 hours away with 30 people actually, because we had a whole bunch of friends coming and
friends from Seattle, friends from Vegas, people moved all over the place.
it was this weird God swirl is what it felt like. And we all ended up in Redding, California.
We're using the word swirl now?
Well, yeah, that's
Okay.
really what it felt
Fair
like.
enough.
Yeah, it was. I don't know if you've ever been in a God swirl. That's
true.
There's no other language for it. It was
There
like
really
a
isn't.
swirl. We moved up here, but this is what happened with the best of intention. I looked back after the dust had settled a few years and realized, whoa, I made some huge mistakes in that move because I was so selfishly seeing only what God was doing with me and our family that I didn't see the damage, and maybe damage is a dramatic word, but I didn't see the debris that was happening behind me. I left grandparents, we left cousins, we left nieces and nephews without, I mean, we said goodbye, like, bye, we're leaving. And there wasn't a lot of care and attention for the impact that that would have on my entire family and yours.
Yeah.
From
Both
there
ends.
on out. So I feel bad about that in a
Well, I
lot
think
of
that's
ways.
a point to rest on for a second. I mean, we don't have to take the whole podcast for it, but I mean, I think it's good to recognize sometimes when you are in the midst of what you feel like is God moving, when you feel like you hear the Lord speaking, to be able to pay attention to how your decisions, and even done with the best of intentions, best of motivations, really heartfelt, trying to do what's right even for your family, how the reverberations of your decisions actually impact the people you claim to love. Because love actually, those bonds of love, those bonds of family actually get impacted by every decision we make. And I think sometimes, both good and bad, we don't recognize how that impacts a family or impacts our connections and our lifelong relationships, because family is the lifelong relationships. You're going to have friends that are going to be there for seasons, come in and out, but how even our God decisions and our really best intentions and health decisions impact the people around us, and being able to pay better attention to that for their care and for ours for long-term connection.
Well, yeah, that, like you said, a God swirl, are we using that language? That makes me think there's something in that God swirl where emotion takes over, and we can make some really big mistakes out of what we feel like is God, and really it's just heightened emotion.
Absolutely.
And I don't mean like in relationship to that move that was, I think we were supposed to move. However, it was so emotionally driven that there was mistakes made on my part and our part in not honoring what we left.
Yeah.
Because we were only thinking about the emotional drive, and it was like, oh, this is just such a God thing. And we were caught up in the swirl. That's it. I mean, because the swirl is like a tornado.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to reconcile that fully. I'm processing it as I'm thinking, because on one hand, you need sometimes, when you're going to make a big move in your life, if you're going to make big decisions in your life, you have to have that momentum in order to do it, because you wouldn't be able to do it on your own merit. At the same time, I don't know how you do this, letting logic set in and go, wait, what? Let me survey the landscape here, because I don't want to be a tornado in other people's lives, ripping up their lives, because calling it God.
Right. And I don't know if it's as much logic as it is just the reality of how I care for the people that I claim to value. So I think that it's not as much, and we can call it logic or whatever language we need, but I think so many people, they come, and I've done this and I've watched other people do it, they come in with large language because they've had an encounter. And I think that the encounter or the experience or the swirl was legitimate, but then they come in from that encounter, from that swirl, from that experience, make big statements and big decisions without operating in without considering how that affects the people around them. And I don't know if it's as much logic as it is in every decision we make, whether it's spiritual or emotional or psychological or even physical, where we actually have to think about how we're caring for the people we claim to love.
And that's maturity.
It's very much maturity. But what's crazy is I think like that's again why it's nice to have your life, I guess just thinking out loud, that's why it's so good to have your life anchored to wise elders who are actually able to speak into those moments. Because, you know, we call it like father and mother. There's all these this sort of weird language and weird meanings. I don't know what all that means, but I do know if our life was tied to wise elders who were courageous enough to speak into our lives, they could have absolutely said, hey, just so you're aware, this is going to hurt as much as it is going to help. And if you can manage that through really good conversations in the spirit of care, you'll actually have deeper connectedness long term, even though it's going to hurt still.
Yeah. And that's why it's important to continually engage with your story. Because when I had the realization that, and it was years later.
Yeah, absolutely.
I had this realization that, wow, we really took a tornado to our families in that move.
Right.
Thank God our families are so gracious with us that it didn't sever relationship, but it could have. Oh, I'm hitting the microphone. It could have. And I do think now in wisdom, because I've really gone through that story a lot. Mm-hmm. What could I have done better? How could we have handled that better? And I hope that I've learned something from that. And I hope that going forward, I will be more intentional when I'm feeling that rush of God emotion to say, okay, where is the wisdom in this? And I love, how do you know what wisdom is? And I learned this from Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she says, wisdom is what works. I just love that. So I want to put that out there. But so it's like, what is the wisdom? What actually works in this situation so that I can honor what I feel is the move of God in my life and care for the people around me at the same time?
Well, and I think at that point you have to know, if we're going to operate in wisdom, we have to know what we value. So if I know that I value, like if you're like, screw my family, I don't care, then you're like, well, then you don't care. You know, you're going to do whatever the hell you want, blow up whatever you want. But if you say that you actually value family, we value these connections, which we did, then the wisdom of what works has to include maybe the slowed down pace that would have included them in the conversation so we could care for that space better. And I think so many times we don't have people calling us to that or helping direct us to that. And I think a lot of young people end up in that space. I mean, we're doing it in our 30s at that point, still just like, we're chasing God, we're going, which is all good. Like, chase God, go after God. That's awesome. But when you have wisdom and maturity married to that, you're able to have the conversations that make it sustainable and lasting in your life, and doesn't just create this debris field everywhere you go. So you have to spend more time cleaning up damage that could have been, and doing repair that could have been dealt with on the front end instead of on the back end. And I think my point is, I think that's what happens with a lot of young people. Like I said, we were doing it in our 30s, but there's a lot of 18, 19, 20-year-olds, you know, who are like, well, we're chasing God, but there's no reality in that young space because there's been no initiation. There's very little draw towards connection. It's just call, you know, over connection. And there's no, hey, how do you see me? How do you see what I'm doing? How does I feel this? How does that impact everybody around me? How do these statements feel when I throw them out there? Because this is what I'm feeling. So I want to just put them out there. And they should. You know, 20-year-olds should be able to just put those things out there into a space that has care and containment, to be able to hear how that feels back towards them. I just, you know, I think I would have benefited so much. And I mean, we're talking about one specific moment in our story, but I feel like there's so many moments I could have benefited from. Can I just put all of these large statements into a space and hear what it sounds like back to me?
And I think what I've learned over many years of getting caught up in the God swirl is, and really the God swirl could also be anytime you feel a heightened sense of emotion in your life, where something feels it needs an immediate response, or there's something in you that wants to give an immediate response to a rush of emotions. And I've made more mistakes making quick decisions and not slowing down to say, okay, this doesn't have to be immediate. Like I can take a breath. I can sit within myself. What am I feeling? What is wisdom? What really works in this situation? And 5 minutes is not going to end the call of God on your life. If you take 5 minutes, it's not going to change your whole world, you know? Because I think a lot of times we've made such quick decisions out of that place of like, oh, this is God. Like, we got to do it now because we're going to miss the opportunity. We got to go faster. We got to move harder. We got to break down the walls, break down the barriers to get there because God's on the other side of that. And there's something that was beautiful in our spirit. I think there was something that was beautiful about that and the way we just push forward. But at the same time, I look back with a little regret and I wish I would have given it 5 minutes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I think, I don't remember who said it. It was years ago, I think, in my own experience that I remember hearing this. And they said, any decision that has to be made immediately, the answer is no. If it has to be made, like if there's something sitting on the table, majority of the time, and I would say 99.9% of the time, when there's a thing that needs to be made, a decision needs to be made right this minute, the answer is no. Because you haven't been able to fully think through and process all the ramifications of that decision. And you may miss a few opportunities, but you'll always end up in greater health.
And I think in my experience, the damage that comes from an immediate yes is not always yourself. It's generally the damage is to the people around you.
Right.
Because you're choosing to step on the toes of everyone around you to get something done quickly, to get something done that feels so pertinent, must happen now.
Right.
And the cost of our lives should not be damaging other people.
No.
I see that so much in I say Christian community because that's the community that I'm in. So I'm isolating it, but it's not exclusive to that community. That's just the community we roll in. So I see that in the Christian community where people are so just running over other people to fulfill their calling, to move where God says they're supposed to move, as opposed to slowing down and counting the cost of your life to other people.
Well, and although it's not exclusive to Christian community, it's not exclusive to church and ministry, it feels 1,000 times worse if while you're hurting someone, you're claiming it's God. That is 1,000 times more damaging than it is if I'm just making a business decision and I just crushed your business, but it was business. I'm kind of moving forward financially. I'm sorry. I do feel bad about it, but I just made, $5.5 million, whatever it is.
Yeah.
That makes sense. In the reason I think it is, although not exclusive to Christian community, it is. We don't need to use, and I guess that's the caveat, is we don't need to say everything is God. You might just be making a selfish decision, but it's the best decision you can make. Own that. Own your selfish decision. Listen, I don't know where to go. I don't know what else to do. This is the best I can do with what's in my life and in my hands right now. I know it's going to crush you, and I'm really sorry, but this is what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's the whole God said. You and I talk about that a lot, where how manipulated, that is just the most manipulative thing you can say to anyone else is, well, God told me.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we'll get into the manipulation part, but the first assumption you make when you just said God told me is that you heard him, number one. Number two, you heard him accurately. Number three, that you heard him so accurately that it cannot be challenged and he is 100% correct, is the most, that alone, those first three parts are so insanely arrogant. We hear in part. We know in part. We see as we are. We see through our lens, through our experience. And to be able to make those three assumptions, first, that it really was him. Second, that it was 100% accurate, and that I have the interpretation of it 1,000,000% right. To me, I'm like, that there's some, just as we start that little like God said conversation, that is extremely arrogant.
Well, and you've shut out any counsel in your life.
That's
because the minute you say that, no one can come against it. It's conversation over the minute you tell me that, well, God told me something. Okay, well, I guess the conversation's over because God said, and I clearly...
Because who am I arguing with? If I say God said, who are you challenging if you're challenging me?
Yeah, I'm all of a sudden coming to challenge God.
Yeah, which is absolutely, undeniably unfair. Now, I feel like part of it is if we just say, hey, I just feel like this might be God.
Yeah.
There's so much tenderness and vulnerability in that. You know what I mean? There's humility when I say, I think I heard. I'm not even sure. This is the best I can do with what I've heard.
Well, and can I say, especially in marriage, if you are in ministry, with us, that you take that to a whole new level. If you're coming to me and like, God told me this, already I'm like on the stakes for, I'm never going to try to, get in the way of you and God. And then now you put the God said on it, and my voice is gone.
Well, and you just now multiply that by, like in our story, and we've seen tons of other stories like this, when you multiply that by the effects, the visual effects that you can see of that person's giftedness on the lives of other people,
right,
in God community and Christian events, all of a sudden it's like, well, now I can't even speak to the fact that what you're doing and what you said is hurting me, because I'm seeing the effects of the call of God in your life. You told me God said all of these things. Now, none of it is even questionable. And we've watched so many people train wreck marriages and lives because of that. They get away with so much. They get a free pass. No leader on planet Earth, I don't care how gifted, how massive their ministry is, how good they are at what they do, how well they hear the voice of God, how accurate they are as a prophet, how many people have been healed when they lay hands on them, how many salvations have occurred because they preached. Nobody is above being called on their crap. No one. If your life is significantly damaging the people's, specifically the marriage and the family that you have committed your life to, you are not above being called on that. Don't care how gifted you are. Don't care how famous you are. You have to be called on your crap. And I have watched people pass over calling other people on their crap because, like, well, look at their life.
Well, especially in the home. Because that's another one of my big regrets in life, is I do look back, because I was in that position with you. Right. Everything you said, just it's like, well, God's clearly moving through you. Yep. I kind of feel like a second-rate Christian citizen because God's not doing all that through me. Right. So clearly you hear more than I do. And I look back and the truth of it is, no, the mother hears for the home. Right. And so I heard what was best for our home and our children and the rhythm of our life. Yeah. And I didn't listen to it because I didn't trust my own intuition, because I felt like surely God was speaking more to you than he was to me. And that was a big mistake. And I think there was a lot that we had to overcome because I didn't speak up and trust my intuition in that.
Yeah. And I think that we end up, because that's what's so powerful about yielding to one another in marriage. Mm-hmm. When we're able to yield, I don't care freaking how gifted you are, how big your ministry is. If you can't yield to your spouse, and if they aren't able to tell you no, when you're convinced you're right, and you listen to them, then you are on a path to train wreck your life and others. Because if your spouse can't come in and go, hey, I have an opinion on this, and you aren't able to listen regardless of how right you think you are, how much you prayed about it, how much you are still fallible. You are still only hearing in part. And when your spouse is able to come in and say, hey, I have an opinion on this, I don't think we should do it, or hey, I actually think we should do this, and you don't yield to them, there's you run over humility and vulnerability. Because the truth is, the moment I yield that, even let's say I'm 100% right, which I don't think I've ever put it this way before, but let's say I'm 100% right. I heard the Lord and it's accurate. And you come to me and you say, hey, we shouldn't do that. Now I'm able to take this thing as a sacrifice I have something to offer him. I go, hey, I feel like this was yours, but you also gave me this bride. So I'm going to set this on the altar. And if it dies, it dies. But in my heart, I'm choosing the bride you gave me. No. I'm not sacrificing my calling. I'm not sacrificing my gift. This is one thing. This is a thing. This is like however many days a year we're traveling, the events we're going to, the things that are so insignificant. It's not my relationship with the Lord. My calling is not my relationship with the Lord. So if I can take that because you see something I might be missing, and I don't want to miss something God's saying, because that's my priority, not the thing. My priority is to hear him and to be submitted to him. Then I can take that and put it on the altar and be okay if it dies. Even if the Lord clearly said it. Like, I'm allowed to put it there, because if it really was him, is it ever going to die? No. It'll come back, and probably come back with increase, because I was willing to put it on the altar for the sake of family.
That's kind of a mic drop.
And I think what ends up happening is, like, even for the story we're in now, when it comes to, even talking about cousin camp and family, is that what ends up happening is we probably would have done some of the things we're doing now way earlier, which is what I'm watching with sparring sessions, fight weekends, the intensives, or whatever it is we're doing, Man Talk Mondays, all the things we're doing, I'm watching, or like even like my best friend Seth, I'm watching it get into the hands of people who are younger than us, because we're able to give them something now that we didn't have when we were their age, which I wish somebody would have done for us. So instead of being frustrated that nobody did it for me, nobody's looking out for me, nobody helped me fight for my family, we are doing now for the cousins, for our family, for others, what nobody was able to do for us. And I think that's the beauty of yielding to even the broken parts of your story, is you end up being able to create from that beauty, always from ashes. It's like, it's always beauty from brokenness when it's put into God's hands. And I think that's even what cousin camp comes out of, and what, like, those connections that we try to build now all stem from those places of, hey, we're going to become what one person said, I guess what was in my head is, one person said, if you look around your life and you don't see the thing you need, you're probably supposed to become it. And I think that is the reality of what many people have that are probably listening to this. They're looking around their lives, and you can spend the next 10 years complaining you don't have it, or you can become it. And there is an opportunity, and it's not all big. It's not events. It's not whatever. Cousin Camp is a beautiful symbol of your life and our experience married together.
Yeah, and that again, like, that goes back to be a broken record. That goes back to knowing and engaging with your story. Yeah. What you're saying in my own life has been, what am I trying to say? I guess what I'm trying to say is, you can only do that well if you're honest with the broken places in your life. Because I think a lot of people walk around feeling this emptiness, or, I wish it would have worked out better for me. And, I feel so sorry for myself for these reasons, and blah, blah, blah. Or they don't even have the language to say, I feel so sorry for myself. Today, it looks like a lot of people in severe depression and anxiety with no understanding of why. And I think when you begin to engage with your story and you go, oh, these were the broken places. These were the places that I wish someone would have stepped in, or I wish that I would have been able to have that in my life to heal those places, that you can go, okay, well, now I'm going to step in and become that for somebody else. For me, the story, my aunt stepped in my life, and she became that person for me and adopted me into her family in a way that was so healing to my heart. And I could have walked away and just sort of left that there, like, thank you so much for that. That was awesome. But there's been this deep place inside of me that says, I want to do that. Like, I will be that for the rest of my family. I will be that aunt. She was that aunt in my life. And in order to honor her legacy, I will be that aunt to my nieces and nephews. And I always end every cousin camp by telling the kids, hey, you don't ever need to thank us for doing this, like for gathering you guys. And the beauty of what's happened at cousin camp and my desire made manifest is I want these kids to know that they aren't alone. High school and junior high is the most challenging times in our life and the most forming. You're really forming who you are in the world and the story you're going to tell yourself going forth for the next 25 years. And I want them to know that they stand on a solid foundation, that they aren't alone, that they come from a family that loves them and that really knows them, because they've all been together a lot since they were babies. There's not a lot of hiding. You know, when you're in high school, you can put on those hats and nobody really knows that you're putting a hat on because they don't know you like the way your family does.
Right.
So there's so much that goes into having the kids together. And actually the two things I tell my kids, or my nieces and nephews, I tell them, which was always told to me as a kid. I think it came from my Aunt Shirley and then passed down through my aunts and my mom. And they said, you come from good stock. And I know that doesn't mean anything to you now, but one day it will. And it does mean something to me now. Yeah. And coming from good stock doesn't mean that there was not brokenness in my family, because there absolutely was a lot of brokenness. But there was also prayers. And you may have a family that you don't know ever there was a prayer warrior in there. But if you are a lover of God today, I promise you that someone in your family prayed for you.
Yeah.
You did not find Jesus on your own. I promise you that.
Absolutely.
So you also come from good stock. And so I tell the kids that because I want them to feel the legacy that they're standing on, that they're on something much bigger than themselves.
Yep.
I know the whole world, we're in this debate now of telling kids they're royalty and they're the most important. And I can say that because you wrote the song. We love the song. And that's true.
Right.
But there's another truth that's equally true, that you are one pebble of sand on a entire seashore. Mm-hmm. And that your life matters because you're connected to the people around you.
Yep.
And you are the support system. That you are not the most important one in the room. And that's important to know too. Anyhow, I end the camp by telling them, don't thank me. Don't ever think about me again. But pass this on. And one of you, you know, there's enough of them there that at least one of them pick up this torch when you have nieces and nephews in high school and in junior high, because I feel like that's such a critical time for kids and for our journey. You do this, you gather them, whatever that looks like. It doesn't have to be there. We kind of made it extravagant because we just have to do it. And if you know us, we are just the most extra people. God help us, you know, just embrace who you are. And that's who we are. So we got to do everything at a 25. But whatever that looks like, and I just say to anybody who's listening here, like, you have nieces and nephews, invest in them in junior high and high school. If that's once a week, grabbing coffee, sending them a text, whatever that looks like, that's you. You don't have to become somebody else to do that.
Right.
Do it. Do that. Invest in your family. And I know there's a lot of people whose family is very messed up And there's a lot of dysfunction and trauma. And I think the psychological world community is telling you to write your family off. People are toxic. Get away from them. Free yourself. And there is times and places for that. Right. And I understand that. But I would venture to say, if you looked hard enough, you could find goodness in one person in your family.
Yeah.
Most people don't have nobody. And if you can find that one place of goodness and you can pour into it and you can connect to it and you can continue your legacy in that way, there is immense blessing for your children's children's children. And that's why we're doing this.
Well, yeah, because that's the age. Why those 8 years are so significant is because we know traditionally and historically, psychologically, that these are the ages of initiation. Like, this is when a boy crosses into manhood and a young girl crosses into womanhood. And there's all the nuance and the ways that those happen and how that used to happen so intentionally. It was such an intentional part of being a part of family and community. It was your elders who did it for you. They walked you into it. Boys will never choose it willingly. They have to be walked into it. Women, because of their bodies and stuff, submit to it in a totally different way and are very yielded to that process. But there's something about those ages where it's not just because they're going through puberty stuff. It's because psychologically there is a crossing over into, I have to take ownership of my life. Therefore, I need to know what my life means and the significance of my life. And a large portion of that you're bringing up is the fact that I have to know what my family lineage is. I need to know what I'm tied to, because traditionally, the way it would work is we tell you the fake stories, which is mythology, up to the age of 13, 14, 15. You go through initiation, and then we tell you the real stories. So it was like you got the big picture of where a people come from, and then you got the significant stories of where your people come from. That was the crossing over. And we don't do either now. We don't do any of the three of the process. We don't give big mythological stories. Everything's way different in terms of screenings and communication, totally different space. Then we don't do anything intentional to walk young people into the fullness of adulthood. And beyond that, we don't even give them the real stories of lineage, partially because of brokenness, partially because of shame, so many broken homes. We don't even want to tie ourselves to that. We want to create something completely new. But the truth is, you are the lineage you came from. And it's so valuable in Scripture. All throughout Scripture, we see it. Lineage, all the way from way back in the book of Genesis, all the way to the genealogy of Jesus in New Testament and beyond. But there is a reality that we have to know what we come from. And I think that's the beautiful part of Cousin Camp, is it's giving all of those an option. It's the larger mythical story. It's the significant family story, and the, hey, you're becoming adults and we just want to be a part of it with you. And we're all in this together. And it's a hodgepodge, it's messy, and it doesn't always work the way that we thought. But anybody listening to this can do that for their family. Mm-hmm. You can. There's always opportunities in some small, significant ways to have impact in the young people and in the people around you. And I thought this was interesting because my dad wrote, this is like a newspaper article from, I don't even know the date on it. This is super, super old here. My dad photocopied it for me. It's definitely from like the 50s. You can see the little ad here. It's kind of nuts. But right now, but what it is, it's a newspaper article on my grandmother on the Carleton side of my parents. And it says this. It says she heard her daddy, she was listening to the men of her family talking in a very specific way about religion in the house one day. And she overheard this. She says, I heard my daddy say that his father was a hard shell Baptist preacher and he was a primitive Baptist preacher, that his sons would be Baptists and his grandchildren would be Methodists. I didn't have this going into ministry. I didn't know there were any other ministers or pastors or family line that was in ministry. Now, all of a sudden, I have a piece of paper that, I didn't get till I was in my 30s that says, oh, actually, you're like a 6th or 7th generation pastor. Like, you actually are connected to something bigger than yourself that didn't begin with you. And the value of being really intentional with your family And regardless of how broken it is, to know your family story, to know their brokenness and where their brokenness comes from, allows you to have a greater perspective of not only just why you are the way you are, which is an important question, not really what we're talking about, why you are the way you are, but really who you are connected to and what prayers have been prayed over the course of your lineage that literally makes you the person you are today and drives the future you're walking into. And I think that to have those impacts in some people's life is the most important thing we can do as a family.